She locks the front door herself, as she does every evening. The gas lamp in the corridor has been turned low. The dog has settled. The widow of Fuencarral Street sets her household ledger aside, smooths her skirts, and prepares for sleep. It is the evening of the 1st of July, 1888. She will not see the morning. And the question that will haunt every room of that apartment for months to come is not simply what happened in the hours of darkness, but whether anyone within those walls was truly surprised by it. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The summer of 1888 had settled upon Madrid with the particular weight of a city outgrowing itself. The capital of Spain was, in that year, a place of restless ambition, of new boulevards carved through old neighborhoods, of cafes crowded each evening with argument and conversation, of newspaper boys running through the warm evening air with the editions held aloft in fistfuls. The population of the city had swelled past 400,000 souls. The streets were dense with commerce, with noise, and with the peculiar energy of a capital that believed the future had already arrived and was simply waiting to be acknowledged. On Fuencarral Street, a long, respectable thoroughfare running north from the old city centre, the building at number 109 stood among its neighbours without distinction. Its entrance was attended by a doorman. Its staircase rose to a second floor along a corridor described by all who passed through it as long and narrow, pressing inward from the front door like a held breath. The apartment at its end was occupied by a widow, a woman of moderate means, of respectable standing, and of, it was said, considerable force of will. She had lived there quietly. She was known to keep her affairs in careful order. She was known to keep her door locked against the city outside. By morning, that door would be forced open, and the city of Madrid would never quite close it again. Luciana Bocino had been born in Vigo, a port city on the Atlantic coast of the region of Galicia in the northwest of Spain, in the late 1830s. The precise date of her birth is not preserved in the documents that survive. She came of age in a country still marked by the wounds of the First Carlist War, that divisive conflict between the constitutional supporters of Queen Isabella II and the Carlist movement, which had shaken the northern provinces and left divisions of loyalty not quickly healed. Luciana's family occupied that careful middle position of provincial respectability, not of the nobility, nor of genuine poverty, but of those households that maintained their standing through prudence, reputation, and the correct management of small means. Like many women of her generation and class, her future was shaped in considerable part by the question of marriage. She wed a man named José Vázquez Varela and followed him to Madrid, where the couple established themselves among the growing professional middle ranks of a city in rapid expansion. They had one child, a son, named José Vázquez Varela Bocino, after his father. Widowhood came earlier than Señora Luciana would have anticipated. The records do not indicate precisely when her husband died, but by the 1880s she was managing the household at number 109 Fuencarral Street alone. She had not been left without means. Her husband had provided sufficiently. She maintained her accounts with care. Those acquainted with her knew that she kept money within the apartment, a fact noted in passing, as such facts commonly are, and not thought upon further until circumstances gave it weight. Those who later gave testimony recalled her as charitable in instinct, but demanding in expectation, a woman who gave to those she judged worthy and expected a great deal in return. Her household had employed a series of maids over the years, and several had not remained long in the post. Those who departed made mention of her temper and her exacting nature. The work was not easy. She was not an easy mistress. Occasionally, not with great frequency but often enough to be noted, voices were heard raised on the second floor. Neighbours remarked upon it in the way that neighbours do, and moved on. A young man visited the apartment from time to time. The disputes that followed such visits were, it seemed, a matter of money. These things were not uncommon in a busy city tenement. In June of 1888, Señora Luciana engaged a new maid, a woman of 30 years named Higinia Balaguer, who arrived with a strong recommendation from a man of official standing, José Millán Astray, who held the position of interim director of the city's prison, and whose character had been described as reliable and hard-working. She settled into the household without incident. She was quiet in her habits, she kept to her duties, and did not draw attention to herself. By the final days of that month, the apartment appeared settled. The arrangement had taken hold. Everything, to all outward appearances, was in order. It was in the weeks surrounding Higinia Balaguer's arrival that the particulars of the household on Fuencarral Street, particulars that had always been present but had never before been assembled into a single view, came gradually into relief. The son of Señora Luciana Bocino was known in Madrid under several familiar names. Neighbours on Fuencarral Street encountered him not as a settled presence within the apartment, but as an occasion. The particular quality of footsteps on the stair, the rise of voices that did not quickly fall, the silence that followed his departure and settled over the building like dust after a disturbance. He had been imprisoned more than once. The charges that had brought him before the authorities had included violence. A woman described as his companion, named Dolores Gutierrez Robles, had, it was reported, been among those who had suffered it. He had also, on at least one recorded occasion, struck his own mother. The disputes between Señora Luciana and her son centered, with a consistency that was remarked upon by those who heard them, on money. She had it. He wished her to provide more of it than she was prepared to give. The refusal, it was said, only compounded the resentment. The quarrels were heard in the corridor, in the rooms adjacent to the apartment, in the recollections of those who would later stand before a court and describe what they had witnessed. It was also noted, in the weeks of that June and early July, that Higinia Balaguer was known to maintain associations with individuals already familiar to the constabulary. Among them, a woman named Dolores Avila, whose reputation among those who knew her was not commendable. These associations were not, at the time, a matter of official interest. They would become so only when the question of planning arose. And now recall the quiet opening image. The dog settled at the foot of the bedroom door, the ledger closed, the front door locked by Señora Luciana's own hand. She kept that dog, it was confirmed by those who knew her, because she was a widow alone, with money in the rooms, and she was not inclined to rely solely on the goodwill of anyone who might approach her door. The dog was her caution made visible, a practical arrangement, a sensible precaution. That small, settled animal was the first thing on the night of the 1st of July that should have barked and did not. On the evening of that same 1st of July, 1888, Señora Luciana Bocino was observed by a resident of the building on Fuencarral Street. She appeared as she always appeared. She went inside. That was the last occasion upon which she was seen alive. Just after midnight, on the 2nd of July, 1888, the residents of number 109 Fuencarral Street became aware of a smell. It came from the corridor, heavy and oiled, with something beneath it that was not smoke alone. The building's doorman was alerted. He did not hesitate. He ran into the street and returned with officers of the Madrid constabulary. The door to the second-floor apartment was forced. Inside, upon the bed, lay Señora Luciana Bocino. She was partially burned. Charred cloth clung to what remained of her. The room bore evidence of fire, scorching, the smell of oil that had been applied deliberately. Yet the destruction was contained. It had not spread to the walls or the furniture beyond the immediate area of the body. The fire, the officers observed almost at once, had not burned with the character of an accidental or uncontrolled blaze. It had been directed. In the adjacent room, Higinia Balaguer was discovered. She was unconscious and could not be roused. Officers recorded her condition and attended to her. The dog had not barked. The dog was silent where it lay. This, too, was recorded. The apartment was examined room by room. Drawers had been opened. Items had been displaced in a manner consistent with a search. Yet the money that Señora Luciana kept within the apartment remained in the rooms. The valuables, identified by neighbours as belonging to her household, were found in their customary places. Whatever disorder had been created, whatever evidence of disturbance had been arranged in the rooms, had not served the purpose of a theft. It had been arranged, the officers concluded, to suggest one. The body was examined where it lay. Senora Luciana had been stabbed 3 times. One wound had penetrated the heart. Then the officers turned their attention to the question of how entry had been gained. They examined the door. They examined each window. They questioned the doorman. They spoke to the neighbors who occupied the adjacent rooms. No point of entry showed evidence of having been forced from without. No window had been opened from the street. The doorman had admitted no unfamiliar person. No neighbor had observed a stranger upon the stair. And in that absence, in those unforced locks and unbroken latches and the long, narrow corridor through which no stranger had passed, the answer to the question with which this account began arrived, plainly and without any drama at all. No one had come in from the street. Whatever had occurred in that apartment on the night of the 1st of July had been carried out by a person already within those walls when the front door was locked. The post-mortem examination of Senora Luciana Bocino was conducted under the authority of Madrid's medical establishment, and its findings were presented in formal proceedings thereafter. They did not arrive complete and at once. They arrived as significant findings most often do, in a sequence, each stage revising what the preceding stage had established. The first impression, formed at the scene, had been consistent with a death in which fire had played the principal role. The burns to the body, the charring, the smell of oil, these had created, superficially, an image consistent with a blaze, one that might also have encompassed violence. This first impression did not endure the examination. The medical assessment established that the burns had not caused death. They had been applied to injuries already made, to a body already dead, or to one in which the fatal wound had already been struck. The fire, this finding confirmed, was not the act. The fire was the concealment of the act. The second understanding, that the violence itself might have been impulsive, sudden, the product of a single unguarded instant, was equally challenged by what the physical examination revealed. 3 stab wounds were identified. One had penetrated the heart with a precision that the examining physician noted in his formal report. The number of wounds, their placement, and the care with which they had been made were not, the prosecution would later argue, consistent with a blow struck in panic or without forethought. The final conclusion, assembled from the body, the condition of the apartment, and the evidence gathered in the days that followed, was plain and unambiguous. The dog had been rendered insensible not by fear or by confinement, but by a substance administered before the events of that night. Oil had been found in a quantity and of a character that indicated prior purchase, not a material found casually within the household, but something obtained with a purpose in mind. The fire had been set with the deliberate attention of a person who understood what fire is useful for. Premeditation. The word appeared in every subsequent official document that addressed the matter. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now let's continue. As Higinia Balaguer recovered sufficiently to speak, officers put their questions to her formally. Her account of the events of the 1st of July proved, from the outset, to be a document in motion. She stated initially that she could recall nothing, a claim that the evidence before the investigators made very difficult to accept. In the days that followed, she introduced the figure of an intruder who had entered the apartment and acted alone. She then named that intruder as José Vázquez Varela Bocino, the son of the dead woman, whom she alleged had murdered his mother and compelled her assistance in concealing the act, administering a substance to render her insensible. José Vázquez Varela Bocino, Dolores Avila, and José Emiliano Stray were formally charged alongside Higinia Balaguer. All 4 were remanded into custody to await trial. The trial of Higinia Balaguer Seoane, José Vázquez Varela Bocino, Dolores Avila, and José Emiliano Stray opened before the courts of Madrid on the 26th of March, 1889, 8 months after the murder on Fuencarral Street, and not one moment before the public appetite for the proceedings had diminished. Those who wished to attend had begun queuing through the night in advance of the opening session. When the doors were opened, the courtroom held as many as could be admitted within it. The press occupied their positions. The spectators pressed against one another in silence, waiting. The prosecution presented its case with methodical and deliberate care. They placed before the court a sequence of established facts, designed to demonstrate premeditation in each of its particulars. Oil procured before the night of the 1st of July. The dog rendered insensible by a substance requiring forethought and familiarity with the household. The fire set with the particular attention of someone who understood its concealing properties. 3 wounds, 1 penetrating the heart, were submitted as inconsistent with the act of a person startled into violence. The prosecution then turned to the matter of the testimony. They laid before the court the full sequence of Higinia Balaguer's accounts, from total ignorance to an unnamed intruder, to the naming of the victim's own son, to the final admission of having struck the blow herself, offered as the product of a momentary loss of composure over a broken household object. Each version, the prosecution observed, had been produced only when its predecessor had become unsustainable. They invited the jury to consider how much credence such a record of revision could command. The defense was conducted by Nicolas Salmeron, a man of genuine public standing, who had served as president of the First Spanish Republic, and whose presence before the court drew attention well beyond the legal proceedings themselves. He sought to present Higinia Balaguer to the jury as a servant overwhelmed by fear, coerced by influences not fully visible to the court, driven into an act she had neither planned nor desired. He raised, with care, the question of José Vázquez Varela Bocino's possible role in what had occurred, even in the absence of proof of his physical presence. The case against the son and against Millán Astray did not hold. The records of the son's confinement on the night in question were produced and could not be convincingly disproved. No witness of reliable account placed him at the apartment. The evidence against both men fell away. On the 25th of May, 1889, the jury returned its verdict. Higinia Balaguer was found guilty of the robbery and murder of Señora Luciana Bocino and sentenced to death. Dolores Avila was convicted as an accomplice to the act and received 18 years of imprisonment. José Vázquez Varela Bocino and José Millán Astray were acquitted. The courtroom recorded the moment in the official transcript. On the street outside, it was recorded in a different manner entirely. Appeals were entered on Higinia Balaguer's behalf, and the legal process extended her life for more than a year beyond the date of her condemnation. During those months, Madrid did not turn its attention elsewhere. El Liberal and La Correspondencia de España, the newspapers that had devoted daily columns to every development since the first days of July 1888, now tracked the progress of the appeals with the same appetite they had brought to the trial. The division of public opinion that had marked the investigation had not resolved cleanly at the verdict. Those the press had labelled higienistas, who held the maid innocent or at least less culpable, and those labelled varelistas, who held her responsible and considered the accusations against the son an injustice rooted in class, had not abandoned their positions. They had merely grown quieter. On the 19th of July, 1890, nearly 2 years to the fortnight after Señora Luciana was found upon her bed, Higinia Balaguer was executed in public in Madrid by the method of garrote. The crowd assembled was estimated at 20,000 persons. Those who were present recorded that she was composed in her bearing at the end. Her last words, called out before the assembled city, were "Dolores, duros." The meaning of those 2 words was never conclusively established. Some who heard them believed that duros, the common term for hard currency coins, referred to money stolen or concealed in the events surrounding the murder. Others held them to be a final accusation, a dying attempt to implicate another. The records do not resolve the question. Higinia Balaguer was the last person to be publicly executed in the city of Madrid. Of Signora Luciana's family, the record that remains beyond the verdict is fragmentary. The son, acquitted but not restored to any settled reputation, was subsequently implicated in another suspicious death, that of a woman who fell from a building elsewhere in the city. He was convicted in that matter and served 14 years in custody. During his imprisonment, he applied himself to the craft of photography. Upon his release, he opened a studio. Whether it prospered, the documents do not say. The building at number 109 Fuencarral Street changed with the city. Municipal reforms altered the street's numbering, and the apartment that had been known as 109 became number 95. A guest house took occupation of the rooms where the widow Varela had kept her ledger and her accounts, and her careful record of the household's affairs. Two expressions passed into the common speech of Madrid in the years that followed. One held that a notably famous or scandalous matter might be described as more famous than the crime on Fuencarral Street. The other used the phrase, like the porter of Fuencarral, to describe a person of conspicuous unreliability. The case had entered the city's language, as its most consequential events tend to do. What the murder at number 109 had demonstrated, in the columns of its newspapers, in the crowds that waited outside its offices through summer evenings, in the cafes and doorways where the evidence was debated alongside the testimony, was the particular power of a modern city to transform a private act of violence into a public event. Questions of class and credibility, of who might be believed and who might not, had been argued not only in court, but in the street. The press had reported and sometimes exceeded the facts. The public had formed their opinions and named themselves accordingly. A widow had kept her door locked, her ledger close, her dog beside her, and her money within the walls of a second-floor apartment on a street in a city that was growing faster than it could govern itself. The morning came anyway, and the city remembered.